Hello, I'm Adam Teitelbaum, and welcome to this week's discussion about Parshat Vayera. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to take a moment to read out loud the blessing that the text is in the comments below, to build that practice of sanctifying this moment and elevating the experience of studying Torah, and reading out loud this note of gratitude of the commandment to engage in Torah learning. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and to name this mustache. Although I believe that it probably does not require much of an introduction, I do want to share a note of why I have it. For over a decade now, I have been using the month of November and my platforms to be able to raise awareness about issues that are important to me, particularly around men's health and men's mental health. According to a NIH, the National Institute of Health study that was published in 2023, the leading cause of death for men between 25 and 44 years old, other than accidental injury and heart disease, and in this case, because the data came from 2021, COVID, the leading death is suicide. And so I believe that raising awareness is a critical issue. And so while on the one hand, with the mustache and this moment, I have raised awareness, if you want to learn a little bit more about the organization that I've been supporting, Movember, and about the movement and about why a mustache, I've also included a link below. Parshat Vayera. Okay, I also have a different background because this one's a doozy, and I hope you'll go along with me on this journey because I think this one is going to be a little bit long because, first and foremost, the amount that's in this. We have the story of the three travelers, the prophecy of Isaac's birth, Abraham negotiating with God about whether or not to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed, Lot's wife, Lot's daughters, when Abraham purchases the land and creates the pact with Abimelech in order to create Beersheba, Isaac's birth, Hagar and Ishmael and their banishment, the binding of Isaac, and then the learning of new family members, including Isaac's future wife, Rebecca. All of that in one parsha. So even if you're just listening to me, I highly encourage that you take a moment to set aside time and read the entirety of this parsha because there is a ton in it. And in full disclosure, I am using notes more readily this time because there's a topic in this that I felt compelled to discuss, even though I tried really hard not to talk about the binding of Isaac. I really wanted to focus on one of the other stories and find something else in there because I was pretty nervous about and didn't want to address the binding of Isaac. I think that there is a lot in it, and I didn't know that I wanted to go in it. I didn't want to delve that far into it. And then I had a conversation this week with a new friend who shared with me a story that made it abundantly clear that I was going to be talking about Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. And this new friend told me a story about a horrifically tragic, unimaginable experience that happened to her. And while I'm not going to share the details because it's not my story to tell, it was the way in which she sought retribution through forgiveness and seeking out the humanity of the perpetrator against her. And while I'm not going to be able to tell specific details, I can't emphasize enough how emotionally powerful it was to hear her talk about seeking intentionally the humanity and the beauty of this other person beneath the horrific behavior and helping that person turn their life around by engaging with that kind of compassion and humanity. And so I got emotional hearing the story, and she said, why are you emotional listening to this story? And I said, well, because this week's Parsha includes Akedat Yitzchak. And I can only imagine what it must have been like between Avram and Yitzchak and Hashem and God in the days and years following the Akedah, how they might have sought forgiveness from one another. And your story makes me actually want to go back and reread it and engage. And so I went back and I reread with a new lens. And I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to try something that I believe is a little bit out there. And I want to reread the story because I think we miss it. I think we misunderstand the story of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac. So here we are, the beginning of the story, chapter 22 of Genesis. And here are the first two lines. Ve'hi achar advarim ha'ele, ve'Elohim nisa et Avraham v'yomer alav Avraham v'yomer hineni. And sometime after is the translation on Sefaria. Sometime afterwards, God put Abraham to the test, saying to him, Abraham. He answered, here I am. Vayomer kach na et bincha et yachdecha asher avta et Yitzchak velech lecha al aretz hamoraya v'ha'alehu sham le'olah al achad haharim asher omar lecha. Take your son, your favorite son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will show you. And I thought, wait a minute. Reading the Hebrew, nowhere in there does it actually say sacrifice Isaac. There's an inference, there's an understanding perhaps of it, but it says ole, lift up. That's another way to read that word. So I thought, what other words in these first two sentences might other be translated? And there's this one word, nisa. Ve'Elohim nisa et Avraham. And Rabbi Akiva teaches us in Breshit Rabbah, that nisa is translated as a test. Rabbi Akiva says that Abraham was tested so that nobody could say that God confused him or that he didn't know what he was doing. It was a test, and he was clear that this is what he was doing. But Rabbi Yossi Hagalili also says in Rabbah that Nisa should be translated and understood that God exalted Abraham like the ensign on the flag of a ship. So what if instead of reading it as God saying, Abraham, take your son, the one you love, and bring him to a mountaintop and sacrifice him? What if God was actually saying, Avram, after all this time, for years, you've been bringing a more Edenic experience into the world. You've lifted the world up. You have created this movement of people that you are no longer ha'ivri, the only one on the other side, but you are the one who is leading to become the father of many, many nations, and you're ready. Now's the time. After some time, some time later, God says, now is the time. Take your son, and I'm going to lift you up like a sign on the top of a mountain for the world to see. Everybody's going to see it. V'kach Yitzchak ve'lech lecha el eretz. Lech lecha. Last Parsha, we just heard Lech Lecha, this conversation about the spiritual journey that Abraham had to go to leave his father's land to the promised land. And now God's saying, I'm going to lift you, Nisa. Lech lecha, go with Yitzchak so that he can be part of it. And I'm going to create an experience on the top of a mountain where the transition of leadership and power is going to go from you to Isaac in an unmistakable way. We're going to make this a moment that there will be zero ambiguity that Isaac is the one who is inheriting this miraculous future of the covenant that I have with you. And Abraham misinterprets the instructions. Abraham hears, Nisa, I'm going to test you. And he hears, Le'oleh Hamoraya ve'ha'alehu sham le'olah. Go sacrifice your son. And God, who has promised that in order for humans to have free will, does not intervene in human behavior. And so imagine, like in a movie, when we, the viewer, we can see, no, don't go around that corner, don't do the thing, don't say that, don't respond this. We have that knowledge that what the person in the movie is about to do is a bad thing. It's the wrong thing. We don't want them to do it. And God's going, Abraham, don't do it. But now I'm going to have to break this rule where I'm not going to intervene with human behavior, and he has to intervene. But God can't do it himself. He has to send a messenger. And a messenger of God, an agent, comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, wait, don't do it. And it's in this moment that Abraham knows that he messed up. It's in this moment when Abraham sees God's agent calling him, not God, that he made a mistake. And could you imagine what that moment must have felt like? Abraham poised with a knife in hand, Isaac, who was 34 at the time, by the way, according to Midrash, Isaac bound on an altar, God watching, and an agent saying, don't do it. That the man who had been interfacing with God directly, negotiating, arguing, pushing back on decisions, thinking about ways to make the world a better in more Edenic space. Now he has to talk to God's agent. He can't talk to God directly anymore. How beautiful the next moment. How beautiful the next moment that God, that Hashem, goes back and rereads the email. He goes back and he says, oh no. I see where the mistake, the confusion happened. I said, V'ha'alehu sham le'olah, that I'm going to lift you both up, Nisa, like a flag for the whole world to see. But Avraham read and he heard, V'ya'alehu le'olah, the same phrase about the ram that is put up in a burnt offering. And God sends his agent back a second time. He sends him back and says, Abraham, I see where the mistake happened. And I assure you, and I promise you, that you followed my instructions. You are forgiven. And all of the things that I've promised you are still ahead of you. And all of the blessings for Isaac and your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. I'm holding this promise to you. And Abraham, who could have used this moment to abandon everything and thought, how could I possibly continue to bring the message into the world of somebody who would ask of me to kill my own miraculously born son, whether it was a misinterpretation or not. But he goes back, he returns to Beersheba, and he continues to live out the rest of his life, spreading the word that he has brought into this world to make it a more Edenic space. And Isaac, who after this moment could have easily walked away from the whole thing, decides it's too important. I'm going to continue to move this forward. The three of them, each in their own way, are able to acknowledge what happened, learn from it, and move forward. But they never speak to each other again. Here we are, like living this human experience, and there are times we miss the mark. People do things to us that are so horrific and terrible. We do things to others that feel unspeakable and unimaginable. So what do? And I think that this Parsha, and I think that the story here is about forgiveness. About seeing the humanity in other people, about not letting past traumas define us, but instead growing from them, learning from them. And that's part of the healing process. If the goal of existence is to have this relationship with Hashem that is like the Garden of Eden, where we just get to be in it together. The reason we got kicked out was because of making a mistake. How powerful an idea to think about, that we have the power to correct that mistake and to bring ourselves back into Eden. That's what I think that this story is about. So let's learn how to do that. Let's learn how to always see the humanity in one another, to forgive, never to forget, and to move forward stronger than before.